It's May the 8th, year 2000, in George's Kitchen. Gary Lockwood speaking.
This is a first in a series of programs that we're going to do called Neat People to Meet in Your Community. And today we're at the house of George Murray, writer, poet, visionary, father, who is also a local resident who is an expert on coffee. And most of this is going to be pertaining to that, starting with the process of putting the beans into the grinder, and from this point on, we're going to let George explain to us just what he's doing.
Can we express the reason why it should be ground fresh?
Yes. Some oils are volatile. The longer it sits after the grind, the more oil evaporates. And the more evaporation of the oil, the more the taste is changed to the mediocre. That may be why when you buy that stuff by the 2-pound can in the store, it just isn't as good. What we're going to try today is a new experiment. Just been fiddling around with it for a few weeks. The trick is to get a coffee that does everything simultaneously. And I may have found it here. For one thing, you got to go with organic beans, because coffee is a highly sprayed thing when it's sprayed at all. And the more of the poison sprays you get on there, the more it embitters the taste. So we start with organic beans. And what I found is that if you take 2 parts of a really deeply roasted espresso, look how dark that is, friend. Look how dark and oily. But actually a real good smell. If you take 2 parts of the deeply roasted beans, I call it espresso, and 1 part of this Guatemalan coffee from the highlands of Guatemala, and it's a medium roast. And what distinguishes the Guatemalan coffee, God knows why, from all the other coffees, is it's got such a rich flavor to it, not to mention smell. And you mix those 2 together, not only do you have all the richness of the oils that come out of the espresso, and the darkness, very important, that darkness. Anytime you can read the newspaper through your cup of coffee, you've got problems, friends. So a little bit of espresso solves that. We're going to grind it up here. Some folks say you ought to grind it down to a fine powder. But that's not necessary, and I'll tell you why in a second here. As soon as we shut off this sound. It's true enough that if you grind it down to a powder, you can make more cups of coffee out of it because it's got more surface area. You also get more tail. The coffee intoxication has its head and it has its tail. And the more head you get, the more it goes to your head. The more tail you get, the more it goes to your tail. And you all understand innards flush. And so what we're doing is trying to stay away from the innards flush. We're trying to go for the head. Because what's the sense of having a good cup of coffee if it doesn't make your head go ping?
It'll still maintain its diuretic properties, even if it does go to the head, right?
True. But I was thinking rather when I said tails of its intestinal properties.
Mm-hmm.
Innards flush. And you don't need that. If you're doing your veggies and your salad every day, that's all you need, so you can use the coffee just to go straight to your head. So here's what it looks like. Now, the formula more water. probably ought to use filtered water if you're going to make your coffee, friends. Because that chlorine and that fluorine just plain messes with the taste. And some folks say you ought to use distilled water, but that's all right. Just filter it a little bit, get rid of the chlorine. You'll have a beautiful cup of coffee. Imagine starting every day with a beautiful cup of coffee. How it changes everything. So that's what we're concentrating on right here. And we're going to use the French press because it seems to do everything you possibly want it to do, including speed. I'm going to talk about speed in a second. But the first thing is, I got to tell you, I started out doing camp coffee, and that was always very good coffee. But the two problems with camp coffee are this. One, you got to have a strainer. And two, the first cup is perfect, but unless you can drink the first cup in 3.5 minutes or something like that, the second cup is just going to be sitting around in the grounds and picking up more tailings. And you don't need more tailings. And what the French press does is it lets the coffee steep, and after it's finished steeping for whatever the time is, and I'm going to tell you about time in a second here, then this strainer comes along and just pushes all the grounds down to the very bottom of the pot so that what you're pouring is all clean. And even if the coffee sits in there for 5 or 10 minutes till you're ready to pour your second cup, even then it's taken up so little of the grind that you have very little tail. To this end, we come now to the coarseness of the grind that I've allowed here. To this end, if you just put more coffee in your pot and spend less time letting it steep, you get the same results as if you put less coffee in your pot and let it steep more, except for the ratio between heads and tails. So my thought is, put a little more coffee in the pot and let it steep for a little less time. I was really impressed. I was watching that 1960 spy film, the model for an entire genre of spy films. And it was the Ipcress file. And in the movie, the hero starts his day by brewing a cup of coffee. And he pours an immense amount of coffee into his French press, and then he lets it sit for 1 minute. Down it goes. Well, I've compromised. I'm not wealthy. I can't afford money like the spies can to pay for my coffee. So instead I put a little bit less in and let it steep for 2 minutes. So we're going to do that in a second, just as soon as it boils. May as well shut that off for a moment.
Till the water gets hot.
That was good.
Yeah.
Do it. Sorry, friends. Let's start over again. Forgot that I needed a spoon, and I had to spoon it in. Let me find my spoon that I use. All the tablespoons have different measures to them. So here we go. Did you get that sound?
Barely.
I'll turn it on. I won't turn it on. Just a second. So we're going to do 8. We're going to do 8 level tablespoons in here, just to get a 3-cup pot. Yeah. I know it looks like a lot. All right, friends. All right. Let it boil again. around a little bit, make sure all that coffee gets soaked. Now, give it 2 minutes by the clock. And then you folks can judge whether that's long enough or not. Nothing, you're too young for coffee. Because the fact is, he comes into the morning when I'm having my coffee. I've got a habit left over from when I was a little kid. And I used to have breakfast.
Like this. Let me hold it. Let me hold it.
Okay, we're on camera. How old is too young? Well, when I was a little kid, I used to have breakfast when my great-grandmother was having her coffee in the morning. And her habit, which I'm sure she brought over from the old country, Denmark, was to dunk bread in her coffee. She'd butter up a piece of bread and dunk it in her coffee. And I got to doing that myself. And now my kid comes in, and he's 5 years old, and he wants to pick up the toast and dunk it in the coffee. And yeah, that's too young for to be giving a kid a cup of coffee, but it's probably not too young to be giving a kid a piece of toast with coffee on it. And my own sense was that when I was 15 or 16, I started getting a taste for coffee. Let's take that in the other room so you can make noise in there. And I figured my nervous system was ready for it, or I wouldn't have been asking myself to have a cup of coffee in the morning. And I don't know what it would have been like if my pa was brewing up Hills Brothers, but he wasn't. My father was a nut for Turkish coffee. He had Turkish coffee pots, and he would put the water in cold, pour the coffee on top of the water, bring it up to a really slow boil, and then add sugar right into it. And put a little bit of cold water on the top to make the beans sink down to the bottom, and then pour it off. And I got to tell you that half the cup was still a really fine ground bean, and it was absolutely bitter from having been brought up too slowly to a boil. And that was okay in my 20s and I suppose in my 30s, but by the time I began to get gray hair, this French press seemed like such a civilized way to make coffee. But I put aside my camp coffee, and I've been here ever since. So I imagine that 2 minutes have passed now in my quacking. So let's see what happens here. Now that foam floating on the top, there's a lot of the oils in it. And left over from the days when I was doing camp coffee, I could tell the difference between a mediocre coffee and a good coffee. Because when you looked at the foam floating on the top of the coffee, the oily bubbles in it were either a washed out dishwater gray, or they had all of the colors of a rainbow as seen polarized through your polarized glasses. These rich blues and greens and pinks. And that's one way that your eyeballs can distinguish between a decent cup of coffee and a not so decent. I wish it were possible for the camera to record just how many colors are floating on top of that coffee. I can see the pinks and the greens. I can see blues and yellows. Not a washed out dishwater gray in the lot. And that's going to be a good cup of coffee, friends. I can just tell from here. Okay, you can
Pause it.
yeah. If you folks are watching this carefully, you see that this isn't completely black. It's a nice golden brown, despite the appearance of the espresso blend. So it'll be all right. Just wrap this up. And then as one sugar, we don't use granulated sugar around the house, we use maple syrup. And I got to tell you that maple syrup is pretty healthy stuff. It doesn't affect the taste in an overwhelming way the way honey does. And at the same time, you don't have to put up with the nutritionless granulated sugar. Excuse me. Excuse me. Please leave the kitchen. We're in the middle of stuff here and we're making all kinds of noise.